When it comes to finding cool places to overland or visit, it's pretty easy to Google what the best spots are and come up with some popular results. But if you're anything like me, you want to find something a little more off the beaten path, a little more secluded and a little more unique. No crowds, no lines, just you and the open wilderness. But sometimes that can be easier said than done. So upon request from some friends and family, I'm going to be sharing with you guys some of the apps and resources I use when I plan my expeditions and finding those beautiful hidden gems. When it comes to finding that one epic view or that one hidden gem of a campsite, I typically never have any insider knowledge. Most, if not all, of the places I discover, I do so through just spending lots of time researching. Now, none of these resources are actually sponsoring me. These are just tools I use that I find to be very helpful in planning all the trips I go on, and hopefully they can prove to be useful to you as well. First, and at the top of my list, is Gaia GPS. Gaia is basically the #1 resource I use when it comes to all of my trip planning. There are dozens of useful map layers when I'm planning out my expeditions, from viewing public lands, national forests, topography, and as well past and present fires, and there's so much more. And one of my favorite features about it is the use of 3D maps and allowing me to see and view the terrain and figuring out what things actually look like. I use Gaia for creating all of the routes I go on, whether it's a multi-day overlanding trip or just a weekend day hike or even a backpacking trip. It has become basically the #1 tool I use for pretty much everything. And while it's incredibly powerful in creating routes for your own adventures, it's also pretty powerful in creating waypoints for all of your points of interest. Whether it's marking down that one hidden gem of a campsite you found or marking down some other places that you just want to visit, it can do it all. While I use the desktop version for all of my trip planning, they do have a mobile app that I do have on my phone. It's incredibly useful in where I can download all the maps locally onto my device. So if I'm not connected to a cellular service, I still have all the maps there on my phone and accessible. And even when you're out of service, you can still use it to mark waypoints or create routes, which will later be synced up when you come back into civilization. Even though I do use other tools and resources in trip planning, Gaia basically serves as the central hub that contains everything about all the trips we go on. Now, the downside is that it is a subscription service, but I personally find that the value they offer is unparalleled to really anything else that is out there. Next up on my list is AllTrails. AllTrails is kind of my secondary resource I use when it comes to planning my trips. It is entirely community driven by just people who like to hike. And because of that, it's a very useful resource in looking for places I might be interested in without having to tear through the filtered veils of social media, where people are constantly competing to take the prettiest picture. Whereas on AllTrails, when people post photos of their trails, is typically a what you see is what you get. You can find other detailed information on all the trails, whether it's the distance, the elevation, the difficulty, and even the terrain, as well as reviews of people who've recently been on it. They do offer a subscription service, but I myself have not had a use for that as of yet. Typically, if I find something I like in AllTrails, I will pull up Gaia GPS and mark it down and create my own route. When it comes to finding campsites, another useful tool I might use is iOverlander. Just like AllTrails, iOverlander is entirely community driven. However, rather than finding trails, iOverlander is a non-profit project based on finding campsites as well as other useful resources. People can contribute and list campsites they've come across and found, as well as rate and review others that have been posted as well. You might be able to find detailed information on a campsite, such as how hard it is to find, what is the accessibility, as well as what are the accommodations it might provide as well. However, the downside to community-driven projects like this is that not all the information might be up to date. So not every campsite that's listed is actually going to have up-to-date information, and some campsites may not even be legal campsite at all. So with that, if you use iOverlander and pick a campsite, be sure that you double check and that campsite is in fact a legitimate and legal campsite. Another useful tool I might end up using is the Dirt. I actually haven't had a reason to use this one yet, but I thought it was worth mentioning as it could be useful to some of you guys. They do have a pretty expansive list of campgrounds that you can filter through based off of location, the size of your rig, services available, as well as the cost. I myself have not used this very much at all, as I typically prefer to disperse camp. However, if I ever find myself in an area where there's no public land or national forest and there's nothing around, this is a tool that actually might come in clutch. So moving away from a little bit of trip navigation and talking about just useful tools I like to use in general, another useful app I use is Earthmate. Earthmate is an app designed by Garmin, specifically designed to communicate between my phone and my Garmin Inreech. This is the device I use to take pretty much everywhere with me, so no matter where I am, I basically have a way to communicate with the outside world. So whether we're in the middle of Death Valley where there's no cell service, or we're deep into the mountains, as long as I have a clear view of the sky, I can at least try and shoot off a text. And because of the Earthmate app, I can actually type it out on my phone rather than trying to use these little tiny buttons to put out a sentence. And on another note, Earthmate actually does allow you to download maps onto your phone through their app, and depending on the Inreech device you actually have, you can download them on here as well. I do have the maps on here, but I don't use them because I use Gaia. But it is a good backup to have on here just in case something were to happen to my phone, so it's a nice little redundancy I like to keep around. As I venture out into the remote wilderness, not only is it important that I keep a form of emergency communication, but it's also important to keep around tools that allow you to keep your vehicle in good maintenance before, during, and after your adventure. And one tool I like to keep around is OBD Fusion. OBD Fusion is a tool that works in conjunction with an OBD Bluetooth reader that will plug into the OBD port in your vehicle. While this isn't a tool that actually solves any problems, it is a very useful diagnostic tool to have on hand. For example, if I'm out on a trail and my engine light comes on, I can actually pull out this OBD Fusion app and I can pull the trouble code that the engine is throwing and actually diagnose what's going on and maybe even fix it there myself, rather than actually bringing it to a shop and spending more money. I find that with the more overlanding I do, the more I kind of become my own mechanic. Not only is that a great way to save money, but it's also a great learning experience as well. Working on my own rig allows me to better understand how it's built, as well as what parts and tools I would need should I ever have to actually end up doing something on my own on the trail. Overall, just doing things myself allows me to be better prepared for whatever the trail has to throw at me. And for the last tool I use, it is the CFX3 app. So for those of you who've been around for our channel for a while, you know that we use a Dometic cooler, and as it turns out, they make their own app to remotely control the cooler because it's just way too much work to get out of your vehicle, open a door, and push a button. So I can literally do everything just sitting down in the driver's seat, I guess. Personally, I don't use the app that much. I think it's just kind of really funny that my cooler has Wi-Fi. I've had this cooler for almost a year and I've actually never really used the app. I mean, I've used it to like check the temperature maybe in the middle of the night when I'm in the tent, or maybe while we're on the road and I don't want to pull over. But for the most part, I don't really need it that much, but I suppose I could use it to turn the ice maker on before we get to camp so that when we get to camp, we have ice for margaritas, I guess. Maybe that's an option worth exploring here in the future. So those are the main apps and tools I use for all of my trip planning, and as well as some of the tools I use during my trips. There are a bunch of other tools out there that can help you plan your own adventures, but rather than making one giant list of all the tools, I like to keep things simple and just kept the list small and show you what it is I use. And if you guys want to see more videos like this, by all means, let me know down in the comments and I will be more than happy to help out. Anyway, I hope this video was helpful to you and kind of points you in the right direction of where to go if you weren't certain as to how you should be planning your trips or what tools you might want to use. But that's all I have for you guys today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and give it a thumbs up, and I will see you guys in the next video.